Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Spurs Up. As always, I'm Jack Taylor, joined by Deric Rush. This week, we've got a couple of things to talk about in Gamecock sports. First and foremost, talk about the men's basketball team. They took another loss at the hands of Tennessee Wednesday. Now, granted, this was not as bad as the first time.
It wasn't. It was a tough loss. What I will say that I noticed, and it's kind of been a constant over the course of the season, they lack rebounding presence. You know, they were out rebounded by Tennessee, and being out rebounded and not having that backcourt depth that we don't have this season, it takes its toll, and it's evident every week.
And that's a real problem, because you would think with the amount of big men we have, we would be a lot more physical in the paint. But the problem is when they become physical, they tend to foul out fairly quickly. You have Hase, you have Chris Silva, you have Kotsar, where they are big, lumbering bodies trying to get to that ball. And more often than not, these refs in college basketball will call that foul.
We did have some good minutes from our returners. Chris Silva had some good minutes. He played about 35. Mike Kotsar had some decent turnout as well. We also had some pretty good production from AJ Lawson. But like I said, that lack of backcourt depth as well as the rebounding issues, the woes continue. So
it's going to be a tough stretch for the Gamecocks. They're sitting at number 5 in the SEC with 7 wins and 4 losses in the conference. They're 500 overall. But the problem is that 4-loss record, which would have been fairly adequate, maybe above average in the SEC of a couple years ago, is not anywhere good now. You cannot get by off of that, where you have 3 teams in the top 25. You have Ole Miss sitting at 7-4 as well, but they're 20, and I think it was 7 or 8 in the overall. So with that stretch of 5 or 6 games in the beginning of the season where we lost to Wyoming, Stony Brook, other teams that we shouldn't even have to blink at, that's setting us pretty back. So they take on Texas A&M this Saturday at Colonial Arena, and that's going to be, it's not a horribly important game, but it kind of is.
It is crunch time. It's crunch time. We're getting into conference play. Tournaments right around the corner, and if Frank Martin's going to have his team doing dancing again, we're going to need some changes. We're going to need some monetary adjustments.
It's going to be ride or die from this point on. And another some news from the basketball team: Evan Hinson, who has been a two-way player for the past couple years. He was on the team when they went to the Final Four. He has now decided to quit basketball and focus on football full time. So it's not really a huge killer in the roster, but as far as leadership goes, tournament experience, that is going to be something that the team might miss.
Right, yeah, for sure.
And then moving on to women's basketball, as we've been talking about and as we've seen, they were able to defeat Georgia Thursday night after losing to UConn by a pretty large margin. Now, UConn, they always play tough against the Gamecocks. It's always a hard-fought game until there's a certain point where, kind of like the men's team, UConn starts to pull ahead.
Well, it's Gino does this thing that I find, almost puppeteer-like. He establishes roles for each player on that team, and once they establish their role, they buy in, and they buy into it from beginning to the end of the season. With that being said, when you have somebody that orchestrates a team in that fashion, you can't help but notice how they do everything right consistently. They don't leave room for error. And when you play a team like UConn, you also can't leave room for error. And it shows every single time that we play them. It's always a competitive matchup. And unfortunately, we just weren't able to get it done this time.
I mean, they're too good from the post. They're too good from the arc, from the paint. They're too good from anywhere. I've never seen a women's basketball team that is that physical and that fast-paced. Right. It's unbelievable. But fortunately, the Gamecocks are able to get back in the winning column, and they will take on Florida as, again, not a horribly important matchup. They sit at number 11 in the top 25. So if they stay that way and they stay within the top 16, normally you would host the first 2 rounds of the women's tournament. However, because it is because those first 2 games are the same time as the men's tournament, which South Carolina will be hosting the first 2 rounds, or Colonial Arena will be hosting the first 2 rounds of the men's tournament, we are not allowed to host at the same time. So the NCAA is pretty much just dragging Don along and dragging Coach Tanner along, trying to, as they try to find a different city to play in. But they're pretty much at the mercy of the NCAA, where this is another obstacle that they're going to have to overcome. So it's tough, but it's something that I think the Gamecocks and Coach Staley will be able to get past. As they sit still second in the SEC, but number 11 overall. And then last but not least, some other news in Gamecock sports. 5 Gamecock football players have been invited to this year's Combine. And for a good amount of time, I mean, that's a pretty big number.
Right.
We had Debo Samuels, we have Bryson Allen Williams, Zach Bailey, Dennis Daly, and we have, Rashawn Fenton. So that's a pretty good group of guys that have made an impact on this team over the years.
I think we're making a vast amount of improvements, especially from the offensive standpoint. This is going to be a very crucial combine for Debo and Zach Bailey. Debo obviously having a lot of injuries throughout his college career. They're going to be looking to see if he can be that NFL caliber slot receiver and possibly raise his draft stock even. Zach Bailey's a great offensive lineman. He did a lot of good for the team this season, and so I think that these two are going to really show up and show out this year when they go to Indianapolis, and I'm excited to see how they produce.
And if anything, it just reestablishes our presence kind of in getting players from South Carolina to the NFL.
Right.
I mean, years past, you've had combines where we've sent maybe, 2 players, 3 players?
Right.
And so this is just to show, and like you made a great point, especially about Debo. This is where he's going to solidify being in that mid-second round, maybe even early second round.
Exactly.
Maybe even creeping up into the late first round. I think that he showed during the senior game that he is a force to be reckoned with. I think he rose his draft stock there just a bit, and I think he needs to build off of that momentum. He has to build off of that momentum if he wants to show that he can be, running around with players like DK Metcalf, and you have players like Marquise Brown.
Well, one thing about Debo Samuel is he's a baller, and being that he is one, they always know how to rise to the occasion. So being the competitive individual that he is, I'm sure he's going to figure out a way to, improve his stock.
The problem with players like Zach Bailey or like Bryson Allen Williams is the demand for these positions, offensive lineman, linebacker, while they are high, there is a lot of players that are bringing in
This is a very defensive dominant draft class. Would you say?
100%. Every mock draft I've seen has put at least 10 defenders in that top 10 draft picks, with the exception of maybe the Giants picking up a quarterback.
Right.
But everybody else, I mean, you see Ed Oliver, you see, everyone on the Clemson line. I mean, there's so many guys that can be drafted so early, and teams that need defenders. So the problem with Bryson Allen Williams is that he is going to be being, having that injury, having, the 5th year. Sure. He's going to have to prove that he can still run around with these young guys. And the Combine's a great place to do that.
Yeah.
Bailey, I think he has a better chance of getting into that late second round, early third round, because I think that there's so many linemen that are needed right now.
Well, I think Bryson Allen Williams also is going to be good for a lot of professional teams, just because he's such a big body. He's a great possession receiver. So I think his draft stock is going to be fine. It's just, like I said, kind of similar to Debo. It's going to be a matter of him producing at this combine and just really showing, these hey, just because I might not have been the best receiver in the college
level. Yeah.
Excuse me, the college level. Who's to say, what can happen in that draft class or the combine?
Exactly. The combine's where anything can happen, and so I think you can't rule out players like Rashawn Fenton or Dennis Daly having a great performance, and maybe they have an insane performance, and they do bump their way out of that third day of the draft.
Right.
Because, like I said, for Rashawn Fenton and another, Dennis Daly was a fairly good lineman, but I think that they're going to both have to prove that they can bring something different to the table, and they can bring that explosiveness to the table. Dennis Daly, he's got some big names backing him up, as he actually signed with Lil Wayne as his agent. So I don't know whether that hurts his draft stock or if it helps his draft stock, but
this is going to be exciting to watch, I'll tell you what.
It will. And that's all we have for you in the studio today, South Carolina. But until next time, go Cox.